What happens to a soldier's heart when faced with the brutal chaos of war? Across the trenches of World War I, the battlefields of World War II, and the jungles of Vietnam, letters became a lifeline, a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the souls of those who fought and the loved ones they left behind. These words, written amidst gunfire and despair, carry not just stories but legacies, etched forever in ink and memory. Today, we journey through the most powerful, heartbreaking, and inspiring letters from history's bloodiest conflicts, uncovering the humanity behind the uniforms.
The acrid stench of gunpowder mixed with the earthy dampness of mud filled the air as Private John Miller crouched in his trench on the Western Front. The distant rumble of artillery was constant, like an ominous drumbeat, reminding him that death was always near. But in his hand, he held a fragile tether to another world, a letter from home. Mary's handwriting was instantly recognizable, delicate and looping, though the ink was slightly smudged by the rain that seemed to never stop. For a moment, the chaos of war faded into the background. He traced the words with his rough, calloused fingers, as if touching the letter could bring him closer to her. "John, my love," the letter began, "the roses you planted last spring are blooming again. Emily insists that we save the best ones for when you return. She's started drawing pictures for you. Her favorite is of a big house where she says we'll live together after the war." John's eyes brimmed with tears as he imagined his young daughter's innocent hope. He could almost hear her giggles and see her tiny hands clutching crayons. But the warmth of the memory was fleeting. A shout from the other end of the trench jolted him back to reality. His comrades huddled nearby, smoking cigarettes or cleaning their rifles, their faces lined with exhaustion and despair. Letters like John's were a rarity, and when one arrived, it was as if a tiny light pierced the suffocating darkness of the trenches. Some men refused to open theirs, too afraid of the emotions they would stir. John, however, read every word slowly, savoring each one. "Your mother sends her prayers," Mary wrote. "She says she's knitting scarves for you and the other boys. She hopes it helps with the cold." John chuckled softly, the first smile to grace his face in weeks. His mother's scarves had always been scratchy and ill-fitting, but the thought of her hands tirelessly knitting for him was enough to warm his heart. Outside the trench, the ground was scarred with craters, and broken bodies lay where they had fallen days before. Yet John clung to Mary's words as if they could shield him from the horrors around him. "Hold on for us, my love," she had written. "You're stronger than this war. We'll be waiting." That night, by the dim glow of a candle, John wrote back. His pen scratched against the paper as he struggled to put his feelings into words. "Mary, the nights are endless here, but your letter reminded me of why I fight. Tell Emily I'll be home to see her drawings soon." As he wrote, explosions lit up the night sky and the ground trembled beneath him. He paused, gripping his pen tightly. How could he describe this hell to her without breaking her heart? Instead, he focused on the little things, how the men shared stories to keep spirits high, how the stars above the battlefield seemed brighter than they did at home. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and tucked it into an envelope, sealing a piece of himself inside. The postman, a wiry young man with a perpetual nervous energy, would collect it in the morning, risking sniper fire to deliver the soldiers' words to loved ones. For John and many others, letters were a lifeline. They reminded them of what they were fighting for, a future where the world would be safe for their children. Yet, as he lay down to rest, the letter clutched tightly to his chest. He couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt in his mind. Would he live to see that future? The next day, as the sun barely peeked over the horizon, John prepared for another assault. The letter from Mary remained in his pocket, a talisman of hope amid the uncertainty. He whispered a prayer before stepping out of the trench, her words echoing in his mind, "We'll be waiting." Snow blanketed the Ardennes forest, muffling the sounds of the distant gunfire. Sergeant James Parker sat huddled in a foxhole, his breath visible in the icy air. In his hands was a letter from his younger brother, David. It was worn from being read and reread, the edges frayed and stained with dirt. "Dear Jimmy," the letter began, "Mom says you're a hero, but I just want my brother back. I'm trying to help her with the farm, but it's not the same without you." James smiled faintly, imagining his gangly, 15-year-old brother trying to wrangle their stubborn old mule, Daisy. David's words brought a pang of homesickness that James hadn't felt in months. He could picture the rolling fields of Kansas, the farmhouse with its peeling paint, and the warmth of the kitchen where his mother always had a pot of stew simmering. It was a world away from the frozen hell of the Battle of the Bulge. Around him, his squad tried to keep warm. Some rubbed their hands together over a makeshift fire, while others adjusted their helmets against the bitter wind. James had led these men through countless skirmishes, and their trust in him was unshakable. But as he read David's letter again, he felt the weight of his responsibilities more than ever. "Mom says," Daisy kicked over the water trough again. The letter continued. "I told her it's because she misses you." "We all do," James chuckled, the sound muffled by the scarf wrapped around his face. The simplicity of farm life seemed so distant now, yet it was a part of him he would never let go of. The tranquility of the moment was shattered by the distant roar of tanks. James folded the letter and slipped it into the pocket closest to his heart. "All right, boys," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "Looks like it's show time." The battle that followed was brutal. Snow turned red as the men fought to hold their position. James moved between foxholes, shouting orders and helping his wounded comrades. Through it all, David's words echoed in his mind, "Come back soon." When the fighting subsided, James found a moment to breathe. He pulled out a scrap of paper and a pencil, his hands trembling from cold and exhaustion. "David," he wrote, "you're doing a great job holding down the fort. Tell Mom I'll be home as soon as I can. And keep practicing with the truck. I'll teach you the rest when I get back." When night fell, John finally tore open the envelope. His sister Maria's handwriting brought an immediate sense of calm. "Johnny," it began, "Mom keeps your guitar on the porch, waiting for you to come home and play her favorite songs." The dense jungles of Vietnam were alive with the hum of insects and the crackle of distant gunfire. Specialist John Martinez crouched behind a fallen log, his rifle at the ready. In his pack was a letter he hadn't yet opened, the pristine envelope a stark contrast to the chaos around him. John closed his eyes, remembering the nights he'd spent strumming his guitar as his family sang along. But the jungle around him was far from those warm, familiar evenings. Here, every step was a gamble, every sound a potential threat. The next day, the squad walked into an ambush. Gunfire erupted and John scrambled for cover. When the dust settled, he pulled out a scrap of paper and wrote quickly. "Maria," he began, "tell Mom I'm okay. I'll be home soon to play her favorite songs again." But John never sent the letter. It was found in his pocket weeks later when his body was returned to his family. His sister wept as she held the blood-stained paper, her brother's final words a haunting reminder of the sacrifice he had made. For the families of Vietnam veterans, the letters they received, whether filled with hope or grief, became cherished artifacts. They offered a glimpse into the lives of soldiers and the struggles they endured, shaping how the war was remembered for generations to come.
Dear Mom, by the time you get this, I suppose I will be gone. I want you to know how much you mean to me and how grateful I am for everything you've done. I never told you enough when I was home, and I'm sorry for that. You gave me everything a mother could, your love, your strength, and your belief in me. Please don't cry for me, Mom. I've thought about this a lot, and I'm not afraid. I know why I'm here, and I know what we're fighting for. If I don't make it back, know that I'll die thinking of you and home. You'll always be with me, even in my final moments. Tell Dad I'm proud to be his son. Tell him I'll do my best to make him proud of me. And tell little Annie that I'll miss her drawings. I've saved every one she sent, they're in my pack. I hope someone finds them and sends them back to you. I want you to promise me something. Don't let this war take more from us than it already has. Keep living, Mom. Keep smiling. When it's hard, think of me and remember that I'll always be with you, in the stars, in the wind, and in the sound of the rain. I love you more than words can say. Thank you for everything, for being my mom, for believing in me, and for giving me a life worth fighting for. Love always. Buddy.
Dear Mother and Father, I write to you in the quiet moments before we move forward again, knowing full well that this may be the last time I put pen to paper. If it is, let me first thank you for the life you have given me, for the love, the lessons, and the music that have shaped the man I am. This war is unlike anything one could ever imagine. The mud, the smoke, the cries of men, it weighs upon the soul in ways words cannot fully express. Yet, amidst it all, I find solace in memories of home, the gentle rustle of leaves in our garden, the melody of the piano as you played, Mother, and the evenings spent together by the fire. Please do not grieve for me if I do not return. I know you will, of course, but try to remember that I go with a purpose. We fight not for glory, but for the hope that someday, others will not have to endure this. That is what keeps me moving forward, the thought of a future where peace is not a dream but a reality. Tell Aunt Agnes that her care packages were always a delight and brought smiles to all the lads in my company. Such small comforts mean the world to us here. And Father, thank you for your letters of advice, they've steadied me in moments of doubt and fear. I am not afraid of what lies ahead. If my time comes, know that I go with a heart full of love for you both and for the beauty of the life I've been privileged to live. Think of me, not as a soldier lost, but as your son who cherished every moment with you. All my love, George.
All right, ready for a deep dive? We're going into the world of wartime letters today. We'll be hearing from folks who lived through World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
It is,
Yeah.
Reading about these conflicts in a textbook is one thing, but these letters, they're like a time machine.
Totally. It's like we're getting a glimpse into their lives, hopes, anxieties, all that. Things you wouldn't find in official records, right?
Exactly. The emotions, wow. Love, fear, you name it. It's all there in their own words.
Yeah.
So let's start with World War I.
Okay.
Private John Miller. In the trenches. Man, trench warfare, brutal. Doesn't even begin to describe it.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what was daily life really like for someone like John? Beyond the obvious danger, I mean.
Well, you got to remember, this was a new kind of war. Trench warfare was unlike anything they'd seen before. A stalemate, this grinding, awful conflict. Soldiers stuck in these muddy, rat-infested ditches for months on end. Disease was everywhere. And the shelling, constant shelling, created this incredible tension. Imagine the noise, the stench, knowing that any second a shell could land right on you.
Gosh, it's hard to even fathom. And then into this horrific situation comes a letter from John's wife, Mary.
Right.
She writes about their daughter, Emily, her drawings, the roses blooming back home. It's such a contrast to John's reality.
Yeah.
But I bet it wasn't just the good news that made this letter so important to him.
You're right. It's what's between the lines. See, Mary mentions knitting scarves for the soldiers, almost like she's trying to, I don't know, extend a piece of home to the front lines. A silent plea for John to hold on to hope.
Almost like she's weaving their lives together, even with all the distance and horror.
Exactly.
And it makes me think, the sources mentioned soldiers gathering to share letters from home. It wasn't just a private thing.
No, not at
It
all.
became communal, didn't it?
Absolutely. Shared lifelines. Picture this. You're huddled in a trench. The world is mud and fear. Then your buddy reads a letter about a baseball game back home or a neighbor's new puppy. Suddenly it's like you're transported back to a world you'd almost forgotten.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah, these letters weren't just personal. They were a way for soldiers to remember their humanity, to remind each other that they weren't just cogs in a war machine.
It really highlights the need for connection, even in the most dehumanizing circumstances.
No.
Now, let's fast forward to World War II. The Battle of the Bulge.
Okay.
Brutal conditions, but in a whole different way.
Right. The winter of '44 was one of the coldest on record. Sub-zero temperatures, heavy snowfall, soldiers on both sides facing frostbite, and supplies were dwindling.
Wow.
The fighting in the Ardennes forest was a struggle for survival, pure and simple, a far cry from the static trenches of World War I.
And in this frozen hell, we meet Sergeant James Parker.
Yeah.
James gets a letter from his younger brother, David. David's back home in Kansas on the family farm. He talks about struggling to manage the farm work, taking care of their mother, missing James like crazy. Was that common? Families back home dealing with those burdens?
Absolutely. A lot of letters from that time show the hidden costs of war, what was happening back home. David's letter is a perfect example.
Yeah.
He's putting on a brave face, telling James he's got everything under control, but you can sense the worry, the longing for his brother.
That unspoken weight, it's heavy. And for James, fighting in the bulge, surrounded by death, freezing, what impact did a letter like that have?
It became a huge motivator. David's descriptions of farm life, their mother waiting, it's a stark contrast to James's reality.
Yeah.
A reminder of everything he's fighting for, a little piece of home he can carry with him.
It's like a shield against despair. And James writes back, reassuring David, promising to teach him how to drive the truck when he gets home.
Right.
These little promises, did they take on a whole new meaning in wartime?
Absolutely. When you're facing death, those everyday promises become so important. They represent the future, the life they're fighting to get back to.
It's that yearning for normalcy, for connection, that really stands out.
Okay, for our last story, we're going to the jungles of Vietnam. This conflict, a whole new set of challenges, wouldn't you say?
Completely different. The terrain, the guerrilla tactics, ambushes everywhere. The psychological strain was unlike anything they'd faced before.
Yeah, a whole different kind of war. And in this environment, this unfamiliar, dangerous place, we meet specialist John Marquinez.
Right.
He gets a letter from his sister, Maria, full of news from home, She talks about their mother, the guitar John left behind, how everyone's waiting for him to come home and play for them again. It's a nice image, but knowing what we know about Vietnam, it's almost like there's this shadow over it.
Yeah, and that's what makes John's story so sad.
Right.
He writes back full of hope, talking about coming home, playing music for his mother, even teaching Maria some chords. But, and this is the tough part, he's killed in an ambush before he can send it.
Oh, wow.
The letter, it's found in his pocket, a reminder of a future he'll never have. It's like a symbol of all those lost hopes, not just for John, but for so many who served in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about the families back home, receiving the news, but never getting that final letter, that last connection.
Yeah.
It adds another layer of tragedy, doesn't it?
It does. It really highlights how war reaches beyond the battlefield,
Yeah.
leaving families and communities dealing with loss and grief for years.
Years and years. These letters, they're not just personal stories. They show us the collective trauma of war.
Exactly.
Each one is like a piece of a bigger story.
Yeah.
And when you put them together, you start to see the real human cost.
Right.
We've talked about these letters individually, but what I find fascinating is how they kind of speak to each other across different wars, different times. What connects them all? What common threads do you see?
Well, the emotions, for one. Whether it's John Miller in World War I finding comfort in his wife's words, or James Parker in World War II drawing strength from his brother's letter, there's this longing for home, this connection to family that runs through all of them.
Like a fundamental human need that gets amplified in wartime.
Exactly.
And what about the letters themselves? Do you see any changes in how they're written, the things they focus on from World War I to Vietnam?
That's an interesting point. In the early letters, there's a lot of talk about duty, patriotism, the big picture of the war.
Yeah.
But as you get into World War II and Vietnam, there's a shift. They become more personal, more about the individual's experience. They wrestle with the mental toll of war, the moral questions, the disillusionment.
So it's like the letters reflect a growing awareness of how complex war really is.
Exactly. They challenge the simple narratives of heroism and victory.
They make you see the human side of it all.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in the big events, the battles, the strategies. But these letters remind us that war is really about people, individual lives changed forever. So for someone listening to this, what's the big takeaway? What do you hope they walk away with?
Empathy, I think. These letters, they invite us to see things from the perspective of those who serve, to feel what they felt, to understand the impact war has on everyone, not just the soldiers.
Connecting with history on a human level.
Yes, exactly.
Not just dates and battles, but the stories of real people.
Right.
And that connection, it's powerful stuff.
It is. It reminds us that history is not just something that happened in the past. It's something we're all part of, something that still shapes our world today.
You've spent a lot of time with these letters, immersed in these stories. What surprised you? Did anything challenge your own ideas about war?
Well, I went in expecting, these big pronouncements of patriotism, stories of bravery, and those are there, of course. But what really struck me was the honesty, the vulnerability. They talked about their fears, their doubts. It humanized them in a way I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, it really shows you what courage is, right? Not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. It makes you wonder about the letters being written today, by soldiers, I mean, serving in current conflicts. Do those letters have the same impact, do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, in some ways, it's easier for soldiers to stay in touch now, right? Emails, texting, video calls. They can connect with their families instantly.
Yeah.
But a handwritten letter, it's different. It's slower, more thoughtful.
I agree. There's a weight to it, putting your thoughts and feelings on paper like that. It's not something you can just delete.
Right. It's permanent.
Yeah. And that permanence, that's what makes these wartime letters so valuable to historians.
Absolutely. They give us a direct link to the past without any filters.
Like a window into that moment in time.
Yeah. The raw emotions, unfiltered, really powerful stuff.
It is. This deep dive has got me thinking about my own family. We've got boxes of old letters, photos tucked away in the attic. I'm kind of feeling the urge to go dig through them, see if I can find any connections to these events,
You should. You never know what you might find.
Yeah.
These primary sources, they're not just for academics, they're for everyone. A way to connect with our own past, understand where we came from.
So putting together a puzzle,
Right.
right? Using these pieces of past to understand our own families, how their stories fit into the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Okay, before we wrap up, one last thought for our listener.
Okay.
Imagine you're in the same situation as one of these soldiers, facing incredible hardship, and you have the chance to write a letter home. What would you say? What words would you use to bridge that distance, to comfort your loved ones, or maybe even just to say goodbye?
Wow. Yeah. That's a powerful thought, isn't it? To put ourselves in their shoes, try to imagine those emotions and what we would say if we were facing the same impossible choices.
It reminds you that these weren't just names in a history book. They were real people with hopes and dreams and families.
Right.
And their stories, told through these letters, they can move us, challenge us, connect us to the human experience in a way that few other things can.
I agree.
So, to our listener, I encourage you, seek out these voices from the past, explore these letters, diaries, photos, let their stories come to life. It's a journey worth taking.
It is. And as you explore those stories, remember the people behind them.
Yes.
Their courage, their resilience, their hope, even in the face of unimaginable hardships.
So well said. Until next time, keep diving deep.